What a guest we have today. It is Brian Long, who is director of spoken word at entities like AM 600 KOGO in San Diego, Extra Sports 1360, works with other channels as well. This is going to be an opportunity to spotlight his career because, Brian, when I look at your career, I think of your career a lot like the way the NBA has changed in the sense that it's positionless. You, over the course of your career, have been a host, you've been a PD, you've basically done everything. So there's nothing you can't do in the court of radio. And so it'll be fun to highlight you. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. Brian, so to know your story is to know that you had some humble beginnings, like all of us do when we're getting into the business. So, what was it like living in a conference room in Western Kansas?
That's so great. You did your homework. It's exactly what you think it was. I mean, no one wants to be in a conference room when you're not living in it. It was a disaster, but it was I sort of got sold a bill of goods. They said, "Hey, come out here and you can be the play-by-play at the time and do sports updates." For our station. Oh, by the way, we've got a living arrangement. We're really not going to pay you anything, but guess what? We got a living arrangement. And so I schlep all my stuff out there and I get there, and the living arrangements literally were the conference room of the radio station. So it was it makes for a great beer drinking story, but it's actually true. It did happen, but with you, Brian, I know you've been through the same things. Making your way up and going. I mean, it's those things that kind of show how bad you want it. And I would have paid them to have the job if I had any money. But getting the opportunity at that time was crazy, although alarming when I got there. But it was crazy, and it helped me actually land. Fast forward out to California, which I landed a job in Palm Springs. From that experience, I took the tape of me doing these updates and doing stuff. They were looking for something. They were putting together a cluster of stations. It just so happened I was cold calling everyone, trying to get someone to sniff, and there you go. And I landed in California. So it was. I can't say it was all bad.
What was that interview process like for you when you were trying to get on with Palm Springs?
It was, it was the craziest thing. So I literally, when I say I was cold calling, it was as if I was a salesperson picking up the phone going, "Hey, do you want this? Hey, do you want this?" So I was trying to get, as the world turns, I was trying to get to San Diego, and me and everybody else, right? I mean, you're from here. It was one of those, what did I know? Ignorance is bliss. I'm a kid from Kansas City. And I'm like, well, of course they'll think they want me. No one's, I'm sure, applying for these jobs. So, the guy at the time, I want to say it was Bill Pugh, was the program director at the time, but he was kind enough to basically tell me I wasn't going to get the job. So I started, branching out, and my then fiance at the time had been to Palm Springs. I had never been. And she had been on a trip there and was like, well, I knew LA was out of the question. And I was just basically been told that San Diego was out of the question. So she was like, "Hey, what about these smaller markets that are in around Southern California?" And it was pretty visionary on her side to suggest it. And I just started calling it. It just so happened that in a couple month period, I got a hold of the guy who was like the afternoon host and also the PD on the news talk station. And he was like, "You're not going to believe this, but we're putting a sports station together, and send me your tape." So I sent it to him. And Brian, I'm going to be real honest with you. I was
Yeah.
horrible.
Oh, stop it! We all are our worst critics. That's how it works.
Yeah, but I was critically bad. And but he was, he liked my tenacity. I mean, he liked that I was literally willing to do whatever to do it. And said, "If you can make your way out here, we'll interview you." There was no guarantee of anything. And I was out of work, so that was like a big deal at the time, trying to get a flight from Kansas City and pay for it and hotel and rent a car and all that stuff. But I was like, I got to go for it, and I did. And they were dumb enough to hire me, and so the kind of the rest was history. Once I got in, I was like, "You're never leaving." It was like luggage. They had me for life. I was, I would just started moving about the radio station at every job that, that people would be like, "Hey, will you do this?" I was like, "Yep, yep, yep, I'll do whatever." So I was, it really was kind of the key to my. It's something that sort of has followed me along, like the willingness to kind of take on different challenges. Because like everyone, I wanted to be Vin Scully. I wanted to be Chick Hearn at the time. I wanted to be. That was my goal, but it was like, yeah, we don't have those jobs, but we got these other jobs. Are you willing to do this? And that'll keep you in the mix. So that's kind of how it started, and it literally in the end, if I look back on one thing, Brian, that like I think paid big dividends for me was my willingness, and frankly, it was out of fear of being out of work, just wanting it, not having to pay and support myself, that I was willing to take on these other roles and not be so like, I'll only do this. This is all I want to do. And I think there's a part in your life where that makes sense when you've achieved at a certain level and you're like, yeah, this is what I do, and this is I've decided. But when you're young and you're starting out, I mean, I would add to anyone. I was speaking at San Diego State about it. Like, really, the word no shouldn't be in your vocabulary when it comes to business. It's just, you want me to go run and get, make copies, I'll go make copies. You want me to be the, the afternoon drive talk show host, I'll be the afternoon. Well, you want me to work on Sundays, I'll work on, do whatever they're throwing at you. Just keep trying to take, and and then you'll use it to sort of build yourself as you go. And that's kind of how I was able to maintain through some, even in Palm Springs landing there, they had a big riff like a year or two later that I was actually caught up in. But the fact that I had done so many things launched me to the next stop, which was actually Bakersfield, California. And they were doing it. Bakersfield's a funny spot because everyone's like, well, it's Bakersfield, and it's like, they're actually good radio. It's and I mean that with like a lot of respect. I got a lot of good friends there. But from the outside, it was a commitment, to like leave Palm Springs to show up in Bakersfield and start it all over again. But again, they gave me a shot at this time to work in news in a newsroom. I'd never been in a newsroom at all, and so I learned how to write news and anchor news, and that was like one of the kind of seminal moments of my career, because it was, I was all in on sports. This really gave me an opportunity to do something else. And I had a great news director at the time who was really smart and taught me how to, be able to write, as like, and in what you do. Those who can write are able to sort of jump ahead of everybody else, and he was really emphasized it. And so I got a job that a little small stick, adjacent radio station that was sports, and they're like, you can be the program director, and you're going to work in the newsroom during the day, and this will be your day job, and this will be your night job. And I was doing a sports show at night and all the stuff that came with running that. So I kind of started these parallel paths, and then Palm Springs hired me back, and I took over that cluster, both news and sports.
You eventually would stay in Southern California and work in Los Angeles, which I want to talk to you about. We're
Yeah.
talking with the director of spoken word at several different media properties, including KOGO and Extra 1360 in San Diego. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. So, as far as getting to Los Angeles and going in that direction, and even looking at your career as a whole and making these different stops, the encouragement of your significant other in all this, how big of a role did this play in your career journey and its launch?
Brian, people say this, and I look, I obviously I'll kick the coverage with her. She's been, without her, none of this. I mean, none of it from in Kansas City, my time out of work in Kansas City. she was the one who said, look at Palm Springs. I mean, she didn't know anything about radio. She'd never been in radio. She's not in media. She was like, she gave me that. It was like this really gentle way of saying you're biting off too much. Like, you're going for the whole enchilada, or maybe you just need to start with a side of beans and rice and like build your way into this. And it was such smart advice. I mean, obviously, she's looking at it from her perspective of where it was going, and trying to get my career. But she's unbelievable. And I mean, as the tale goes on, the moves don't stop. And without her, she's the rock of the whole thing, and it allowed me to sort of take these chances and go for things. And she was always very much a partner in it, a kind of willing participant, to go for some of these things.
So yeah, it initially started with maybe just a side salad as far as your career, but then eventually you got to eating the whole set of chicken fajitas. You downed the whole plate. You ended up meeting Colin Cowherd. And so how did your paths cross initially as you continued to make this run up the rankings?
All right, so here's how LA happens, and this is I'm going to pass this along to anyone who's watching this right now, or going to be kind to people that call for a favor. Be kind, because you never quite know when that thing might be reciprocated. So Steve Mason, who is on the middays part of Mason and Ireland on 710, owned some business interests, some theaters out in the desert. So he would come out often and need to use the radio station. You need to use a studio. And he would listen to our show. Like, he'd get off the air. They were 12 to 3. I was doing afternoon drive at the time, 3 to 6 out in Palm Springs. And he would hear the show, and he was like, it's not good, but there's something there. I don't know what it, he was very kind, but like honest about it. And so a position came open, and they were looking for a update anchor. And I think there were two positions at ESPN at the time. They were looking for an update anchor, and they were looking for an APD. And so I applied, ironically, for the update anchor, and they were like, nope. We have about 30 other people who are like light years better. And then the APD role was like, I think and I'm not trying to be so self-deprecating about it. I'm trying to remember it correctly. I want to say I was like 6th on a list of 5 people. It was like there was a bunch of people, but Steve Mason literally said to Larry Gifford at the time, who was the PD, was like, I think you need to consider this guy. I mean, he's running these 3 operations, or these 3 stations out there. He does a show. He's really versatile. I think he could help you. And I interviewed with Larry, and then Bob Kuntz at the time, who was the general manager, the market manager, came to LA. And Bryan, I tell you, to this day, it's like it's my my American Idol moment. But I'm sitting in this LA conference room, and they're like, "Do you want to come to LA?" And I'm just like, I can't make, my mouth is just went dry. Couldn't fathom it. I mean, I'm a kid that was literally in Palm Springs and all over the Bakersfield, and so I come to Los Angeles, and that's where the story takes a crazy way, all these maturations. But I get hired. I'm the APD. I'm not on air at the time. I'm not doing anything. I'm just working as the APD for Larry. They decided to do a station flip over, a lot of changes at the time. And in those changes, they're like, hey, we want a night show. We're going to build a night show. And I frankly heard your tape and whatever, Larry's telling me, I think you could do this. Would you like to be a part of it? So that's how the on-air thing came about. And I started doing like work with USC, part of the broadcast rather, of 710's broadcast with SC, and doing this night show. And then they make a change, like, and I'm going to mess up the timing of this, but I want to say 6 months later, they decide who they'd hired at the time wasn't working an afternoon drive, so they're going to make a change, and they pull me and Dave Denholm down to work with Dave Damashek at the time, and then it could be a couple months. Something happened, and Dave went to do just the digital, the really the beginning of the Damashek podcast, which is obviously so huge now. And Dave and I ended up taking over the afternoon drive slot for what, I want to say about a year while they were, it was never ours per se. It was always like, we're going to see where it's going. But in the interim, you asked the question, how did I meet Colin? Larry asked me to go kind of be a handler for him. Someone had won on the Jimmy V Foundation, had like bid a bunch of money to go play golf with Colin, and they needed someone to go with him. And so Larry, for whatever reason, couldn't go, and so he asked me to go, and then I ended up spending the day with Colin, and he was he invaluable, like what he imparted, like I still to this day, I remember him saying, he was talking about, he had heard the show and he was giving me some sort of feedback, and he was like, black and white's boring, right and wrong's boring. You got to be curious, and I don't hear enough curiosity. I hear you being like, this is how it is, and not enough. And to this, it really was a moment that like changed a lot of how I thought about content, because I sort of came up the way of like, have a big opinion, slam it down, and we'll get in an argument. And he was ahead of his time. I mean, and obviously he's super successful then and hugely successful now. But it changed sort of my thought process about it, and about doing content, and about creating connections and the kind of connectivity versus just slamming some hard opinion, and that would be enough to carry you. So that he became, a guy who looked in on me from time to time to see how I was doing.
What was it like while you were in Los Angeles doing the Lakers Line postgame show and
Yeah.
your role in making that happen?
Yeah. So we got the station at the time got the Laker rights from KLAC. Had them for I want to say 30 years. I mean, they had it forever. And then they, 710 got the rights, and we were able, and it changed everything. I mean, it changed the trajectory of that whole radio station. It sort of tipped the scales the other way. And it really gave the station an identity. And, honestly, Brian, it's one of those things that like, it goes back to the early, like out of necessity becomes opportunity. And, they were like, hey, he can do this, do it. I mean, I have to tell you, it wasn't a situation where I was banging on his door going, hire me, hire me. It didn't work that way. It was like, hey, we need this and this. Oh, you can do it. Well, that saves that. That's not a problem. You just do that role. And so I just, all of a sudden, you're acquiring these different pieces. And, I want to say, and I would think that a lot of the people that I worked, with the colleagues there would say it as well. I never took that stuff for granted, because I did have a dual role, and I always, it worked because everyone else around it understood that, like, I was doing this on air work. Yes, I was fulfilling this thing, but at the end of the day, what was paying the bills was the programming side of it. And that, I had to sort of balance myself in both spots. And a lot of that was the creativity of Larry, Gifford. He was a very smart guy, and a big idea person. And he got it. Like, I wasn't trying to part things off to me, because that could be a problem, with the staff. I mean, if everyone wants to be given opportunity, and I never wanted to come across as like stepping in front of someone else's chance or advancement. And I will say, I don't think that was ever the case. It was not like I was trying to box somebody out. I certainly was always, whatever happened was Larry's decision. It was never a decision of, let me pick my card and put it in there. It didn't work like that, but it was unbelievable. I mean, it's those pinch you moments. I mean, you have a great gig. You hear yourself national. I'm sure you go on vacation, you flip on a radio, and there's Bryan. Or people hear you across the country, and I'm sure it's a pinch you moment. And when you're doing the championship and the Lakers, and you're looking out the window, and the news is showing Kobe and Powell have won the championship, and
Mhm.
you're watching this happen around you. It's like it's not going to get any better than this. This was the moment, that and from an on-air standpoint, I cherish it. I learned a lot from it, to be sure. And I was swimming in deep water. I mean, those are great talent, and taught me how to do what I do.
So when you're listening and you're following and you're hosting, being a part of this Lakers supremacy, as you're talking about with Kobe and Powell, what would yourself grinding it out as an overnight board op in Kansas City say about that?
Uh, you know what? Don't complain. Don't complain. Don't take it for granted. It really is, Bryan. Like, there were moments of, you got. So this is going to sound. I don't. It's going to sound weird, but like, I was doing a day job, right? Like, I would work, 8 hours a day, 9 to say 6, as the assistant program director, and then I was doing the night show, Monday through Friday, or when it was afternoon drive. I guess at that time it would have flipped down. We had SC during the SC season, so from September to November, and then the Lakers started in October, so they were always playing on Sunday. So I remember some moments of feeling like, man, I'm on a treadmill here. Like, this is a lot of work. And then you remember uh, being in the conference room in Western Kansas,
Yes.
or the overnight board operator in Kansas City, and you quickly slap yourself and say how fortunate and lucky you are to get the opportunity. And I do mean that. I think it's like important to take pause, to to have a gratitude about it, because it's you know the, ask anyone who's out of work, or anyone who's been struggling to get into it. Certainly in our business, it's they say it's a small world until you're out of work, and then it feels like this big world. So I always tried to sort of, regardless of the situation, look at it and just be thankful, because I mean, and we live a charmed life. It's crazy. You're, again, the overnight board operator trying to break in to being at practice in El Segundo, and interviewing Ron Artest or whatever, and watching Kobe drain threes, in practice. And like, you want to take everyone who you knew and say, God, I wish you could see this. I wish you could see this moment. So you try your best to do it through your eyes. I mean, because it's special, and it's a lot of fun.
Our guest is Bryan Long, director of spoken word for several different media outfits, including KOGO, AM 600, and Extra 1360 in San Diego. I'm Bryan Fenley. You speak of all these moments special for you, and you talk about how thankful you are for so many who have done helpful things to help levitate your career in the right direction. What is a trademark pay it forward moment you've had on somebody else that you can recall?
I mean, I've certainly tried to recommend a lot of people. People have reached out, or I've reached out on their behalf to, um, you know, they were going for something or going for some job, and called on their behalf to do it. Um, Anything that, I try to remember that, like, we're all just, really, in a weird way, we're kind of all at the same thing. It's just we're all sitting at different times and levels and experience with it. And I think too often, what I found early on, um, I, I don't know that I could say that it happened to me personally, because I was really, I was very lucky that the people, the PDs, the general managers that I had, they were all really good to me. I mean, they were, I'm not saying I got everything I wanted and everything was rosy. I mean, but I learned a lot, and I always appreciated it. I always appreciated, I think at some level, that like people took the time, whether it was Colin being nice, or Gifford, or down the road Steve Mason recommended me. I try to I try to think that way. Like, I've had people come in my office and say, "Hey, I've got this job," which would be kind of at my peril, that they left, and go, "What do you think?" Or this offer. And I always try to remember myself, that, or remind myself that I've been there, and you got to sort of divorce yourself of the business side of it, and the best you can. I mean, obviously, there are some things that just can't happen because of for contractual or business reasons. But from a personal standpoint, if I can help, then you try to help, even if it's I have people that are across the street, that were at our radio station, and people that I would, I to this day, I try to pride myself on having good relationships, with both people that I've had the fortune of working with. Not just, I don't like that they've worked, necessarily the idea that, oh, they worked for me. It's like, we worked together. Yeah, I might have been leading some strategy in that side, but in the end, we built something together. And if you're doing it correctly as a team, you should all feel a set of, a piece of it. And so when that's stripped away, either by the company doing it or you doing it on your own, there's gonna be an emotional part of it. I mean, to this day, every brand I work with, I'm rooting for them. I still want them to do well.
Total team player is Brian Long. And so, Brian, if we now pivot to what you're doing with 1360, specifically in San Diego, if I were to ask any of your talent, any of your producers, those technical producers, executive producers,
Mhm.
what would they tell me they most appreciate with when it comes to you?
So I would just, from LA, and the only reason I bring this up is because
Yeah.
it's sort of the pivoting moment of, I ended up going to Seattle to take over the programming up there, and that's kind of where it became the management side versus the on air side. Um, so I only bring that up because the boss up there had a great saying, and he would say, "It's your bat, your ball, your butt." And he was all about like accountability, but he was also about, you know what, I'm paying you to be smart. I'm paying you to have a vision. I'm paying you to think this through. um, and they're paying me to hold you accountable.
Yeah.
For it. So I liked it, and I felt like I was able to kind of thrive in that environment, and so I brought that here, and it was a different culture. I mean, quite frankly, it was a different feeling of, I don't want to be, micromanaging every decision and thought. And, if you have an idea for a show, I want you to take risk. I mean, don't do I mean, here's the guidelines, here's the playbook. Don't get us in trouble. I mean, don't get us, do it with the idea that if we have to go in front of our boss in her office, you can explain it,
Yes.
and you can allow me to explain it for you, and back you. So you know what that is. I think, you know, Brian, I mean this, like, you can't, the best advice I was ever given on the management side was like, hire smart people, and don't be scared of people smarter than you. I'm loaded with them. I got, that's not a hard thing to do, by the way, to find that, but I'm loaded with a bunch of people who are really talented and have great ideas. And I think for people like in my role, I think our biggest problem is checking your ego and get out of the way, and hear what they're saying. It doesn't mean that everything's going to work, and that you're going to act on it, but give a voice to it. Let people, they're feeling it. They're the ones that are in it. And I think that's where it ties back to me. If I had one part that like has helped, has been having been a host.
Yes.
Having been that side of it, I know, look, I'm removed from it now, but I certainly know the fears and the excitement and the all the things that go into when you are trying something and you're doing something and it's working and when it's not working, all those emotions that get wrapped into it. And so my job, I think, is to get all that clutter away and just let smart people do smart things. And then we'll all kind of reap the benefit of it. And I would hope that they would say, yeah, he's fair like that. He really isn't, he's not breathing down my neck on every little thing. I think that's what they would say.
Brian Long, relatable, approachable. Wasn't it Steve Jobs who said, I don't want to hire people who are yes men. What's the point? I want people to come onto my team that can teach me something. And that's the
Absolutely.
sign of a successful property. And no wonder you are in the position you are. And it's so fun, Brian, to see the role that your wife has played at encouraging you and being that cheerleader. Because I think that when you think about the steps that you've made, that needs to be discussed more. We can't lose sight of how much having loved ones who support us through the ups and downs can really
Yep.
be what we need to get us to that next opportunity. Brian Long, I'm Bryan Fenley. Really appreciate you. Of course, Brian is director of spoken word at several different properties, including 1360 and AM 600 in San Diego, along with Riverside and others properties up there as well. Appreciate you so much. This was a fun discussion highlighting your story.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. And you're doing great work. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me.